For this theoretical machine, she became the first computer programmer in history. Sadly, and despite Mr. Babbage working on this device on and off until he died in 1871, it was never completed. But the design was so groundbreaking that Babbage is known today as the father of the computer. And what a proud father he would be if he was still alive today. He definitely isn't, by the way. You can go see half of his pickled brain in the Science Museum in London. Since his death, Babbage's metaphorical electronic offspring have changed the world beyond all recognition. Despite the famous prediction of one-time IBM CEO Tom Watson, who in 1943 estimated the total global market for computers would stretch to around 5, yes, he meant a global demand for 5 individual computers, there are now thought to be more than 2 billion of the things in homes and offices around the world. If Charles Babbage truly is the father of the computer, he has spread his seed far and wide. Of course, the kinds of computers we're familiar with today are of the digital variety, and these arrived on the scene in the 1930s, around 100 years after Babbage's mechanical difference engine was built. In the 90 years since, the leaps forward that have been made in computing are frankly astonishing. As you may have already heard, the Apollo 11 spacecraft that brought Neil Armstrong and his fellow astronauts to the moon in 1969 was about as powerful as a modern calculator. 50 years later, a common piece of tech that most of us use daily to stay in touch with our friends and generally piss about, the smartphone, is quite literally millions of times as powerful. These exponential increases in computing power we've witnessed are broadly described by Moore's Law, named after Intel co-founder and one-time CEO Gordon Moore, which states that the processing power of computers doubles roughly every 2 years. But the biggest driver of Moore's Law has been our ability to shrink the physical size of key components in our computer processors, particularly transistors, year on year. The smaller you can make your transistors, the more you can squeeze onto your chip, and the more computing power you have at your disposal, measured by computer scientists as flops, or floating point operations per second. The problem is, the smallest transistors today are just a few atoms across. Pretty soon, smaller just isn't going to be an option. Manufacturers are coming up with clever new ways to keep processor power rising, but it's becoming increasingly expensive and challenging to do so, which is why, for the first time in 50 years or so, Moore's Law no longer applies. Exponential gains in processing power are becoming a thing of the past. This doesn't necessarily mean we're reaching peak computer, but it does mean that we're no longer making the kinds of huge strides forward that have powered many of the technological and scientific advances humanity has achieved in recent decades. Now, you might be sitting there thinking to yourself whether we actually need more computing power. After all, if we could fly to the moon on a glorified pocket calculator, the most powerful computers of today should be able to do pretty much anything, right? So long as we have enough of them. Actually, not so much. The most powerful supercomputer in the world today is IBM's Summit. It's the size of around 2 basketball courts and uses 136 miles of cables. It's capable of executing a quintillion operations per second, a number that sounds like it was made up by a 5-year-old to win an argument. And it's being used to push back the boundaries of human understanding in fields like energy, AI, and healthcare. All very impressive sounding, but there are things even Summit can't help us with, at least not unless we have a spare few million years to leave it running. Certain mathematical problems are just extremely resilient to solving by classical computers, even really big shiny ones like Summit. The most commonly wheeled out example is prime factorization, finding 2 prime factors of a given number. Make that given number large enough, and classical computers simply aren't up to the task. Now, Factoring large numbers might seem like a fairly arbitrary thing to want to do with the world's most powerful computer. I mean, I'd just like to know, can it run Crysis? But it just so happens that the fact it is very, very hard to solve these problems with any kind of regular computer.
Hi, my name is Sori Kim and I am an illustrator. I'm honored to have shown my work in galleries such as Gallery Nucleus, Giant Robot, and WowXWow. I also teach sketching at Brainstorm School, and I've taught workshops with DreamWorks Animation. When I realized that a creative career was actually a possible path, I promised myself that I would follow it for the rest of my life. I started to sketch obsessively, playing with shapes and designing strange creatures. The freedom that a sketchbook provides makes it the perfect place to build a basis for any project.
Is one of the foundational principles of internet security. But you can make sure you're already 2 steps ahead of the game by vastly improving your personal security with Dashlane, who have kindly sponsored today's video. The best way to protect yourself against hackers, spammers, and other online threats is by using the leading password manager and all-in-one security suite, Dashlane, who will store all of your passwords in a super safe way without ever having access to them or allowing anyone but you to view them. Dashlane creates strong and unique passwords for all of your online accounts and auto-fills them, so you never have to click Forgot Password ever again. And you don't have to sweat about the extremely rare chance that Dashlane could be breached, because Dashlane safely stores and decrypts your data on your local device only using your master password. This means that Dashlane never has access to your personal data, and any hacker would only see random noise. Dashlane also autofills your credit card information whilst online shopping, so you can make purchases without having to fetch your wallet. Dashlane has a built-in VPN to encrypt your data and keep your online activity anonymous. Best of all, it works on any device. Whether you're protecting your top-secret blueprints to quantum supremacy or videos of your cat, there is no better way to make your online world impenetrable than by using Dashlane. From my experience, Dashlane is the best all-bases-covered security and time-saving tool out there. You can try Dashlane for free on your first device by heading to www.dashlane.com/42. Then, if you decide you want to upgrade to premium, use my code 42 for 10% off. So, if our ability to make more powerful classical computers is diminishing, and there are still problems out there that we don't have the tools to solve with current technology, do we just have to accept that we're reaching the limits of what we're capable of as a species? Actually, no. We just need to build a different kind of computer, one that transcends the natural physical limits of microchips. A quantum one. The first thing we should clear up is that quantum computers are not simply a newer, faster version of regular computers. That means if all you want to do is watch YouTube and share memes, you're better off hanging on to your trusty laptop, even if a few of the keys are beginning to stick. Quantum computers work in a drastically different way to regular computers, and they're good at doing different things. Just how a light bulb isn't a better version of a candle. It's a different way of generating light. A quantum computer isn't a better version of a computer. It's a completely new way of approaching computation. Let's start with the basics. The fundamental unit of information in a classical computer is the binary digit, known as a bit. These bits have 2 possible states, either 0 or 1, and strings of them can be used to encode information. You can think of them as a series of very simple switches. It might not sound like much, but at a fundamental level, bits underpin pretty much every single thing you do on your computer. Yes, even that. A quantum computer, on the other hand, has qubits, literally quantum bits, instead of regular bits. Just like regular bits, qubits have 2 possible basic states, either 0 or 1. But unlike regular bits, qubits are, for want of a better way of putting it, pretty f***ing weird. In our classical computers, the state of a bit is fixed at any given time. It's either 0 or 1, and sure enough, qubits have a 0 and 1 state also. represented by how they are aligned within their host magnetic field. In quantum mechanics, this is called spin, and the two possible states are spin up and spin down. But there is a magical third state. Well, it's actually not a state at all. It is, to put it in lay language, a combination of both known states. You see, whilst a quantum computer is operating, the state of each qubit is undefined. There is some probability of each qubit being a 1 and some probability of it being a 0. This undefined state is known as a quantum superposition.
Poring over functions with pour over coffee, solving pi, crushing pizza, comp sci set to lo-fi. However you study, Quizlet Plus now has explanations so you can own your toughest classes. Learn it, own it, Quizlet Plus.
Where it can be considered to be in both spin up and spin down at the same time. And only when we observe the system will a superposition collapse and the qubit will settle on one of its two basic states. It's an odd concept, but many of you will have come across it before in famous feline torturer Erwin Schrödinger's thought experiment, known as Schrödinger's cat. Before we open the box, the cat is neither alive nor dead, but is in a superposition of the two. Only when we open the box and observe the cat is it one or the other. Explaining exactly how quantum superposition makes quantum computers so powerful would take several textbooks, a boatload of maths, a theoretical physics education that I don't possess, and an exploration of some other weird quantum phenomena like quantum entanglement or spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it. But the general concept is this: a classical computer can only be in one basic state at a time. That means when trying to solve a problem like prime factoring, where there are many potential solutions to sort through, broadly speaking, it must check each solution one after the other. But when a qubit is in a superposition, it's able to process huge numbers of classical states in parallel, which allows it to do certain kinds of calculations exponentially faster than a classical computer could. Eric Ladzinski, co-founder of quantum computing company D-Wave, explains it like this. Imagine that you only have 5 minutes to find an X written on the page of a single book amongst 50 million other books in the Library of Congress. If you search for the X like a regular computer, one page at a time, you would never find it before your 5 minutes were up. But if you had 50 million parallel realities, and you could look at a different book in each of those realities, you would find the X much, much faster. In this second example, a quantum computer splits you into 50 million versions of yourself to make the work quick and easy. And you may think, but we've had parallel computing for over 50 years. One of the big two retail microprocessor manufacturers, AMD, sells a CPU that has 64 cores, and you can slot it right into your home desktop computer with the right motherboard. And NVIDIA's latest GPU can compute almost 5,000 problems in parallel. Why don't we just keep improving these existing technologies? Well, because of the atomic level physical size limits of transistors that we touched on earlier, we're quickly nearing the limit of how much further we can push this parallelism. Unless we change the rules of the game, we'll never reach the aforementioned 50 million parallel processors of a quantum computer using classical computing hardware. Because adding more cores to a classical computer system increases its power linearly, providing the software can take full advantage of each core, of course. Conversely, with quantum computers, with each qubit you add to the system, the amount of parallel processes you can run increases exponentially. So with 2 qubits, you can consider 4 potential outcomes at once. But with 4 qubits, you can consider 16. And if you were to pack just 300 qubits into a quantum computer, it could consider more variables at once than there are particles in the known universe. Now that's what I call parallel computing. Now, it's possible that you might be feeling a tad confused right about now. If so, that's awesome, you're probably getting it. After all, Richard Feynman, the man who originated the idea of the quantum computer in the first place, once said, "If you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics." Seeing as he went on to win the Nobel Prize for his work in quantum mechanics, it's a safe bet he knew what he was talking about when he claimed he didn't know what he was talking about. Okay, so all of this sounds great, but what can we actually use quantum computers for? Earlier on, I mentioned that quantum computers are much, much better than classical computers at finding the prime factors of very large numbers, which is a foundational principle in data encryption and digital security. It's been estimated that a classical computer would take trillions of years to crack RSA's 2048 encryption, which is commonly used to secure data transmission online. A quantum computer, on the other hand, could do so in a matter of hours, effectively rendering modern online security obsolete. But before you withdraw all your money from the bank and start shoveling it under your mattress, don't worry. Digital security has always been an arms race, and in this case, the good guys have a pretty big head start on the bad. Post-quantum encryption methods are already being developed that will be able to thwart even quantum computers, though admittedly, implementing them will still require a radical redesign of the way encryption works online. Think something along the lines of fixing the Millennium Bug, a mythical insect that, if you're any younger than I am, you've probably never heard of, but don't worry, it turned out to be rather harmless in the end. Beyond internet security, there are many theoretical applications for quantum computing. Plans are already in place to use quantum computers to create wildly powerful AIs by supercharging the machine learning process with quantum algorithms. The downside, of course, is that these AIs will one day rise up and destroy us. But in the last few seconds, before we're finally exterminated, we'll all be able to take great pride in how clever we were to come up with quantum computers in the first place. Quantum computers are also, unsurprisingly, extremely good at simulating quantum physics itself. This was, in fact, the original application Feynman had in mind when he came up with the concept, since the complexities involved make this an area unsuited to classical computers. Classical computers are so inaccurate when it comes to physics that all existing models broadly approximate the, in vastly simplified terms, rules of the universe, which isn't tremendously useful to scientists. But with quantum computers able to model immensely complex interactions at the particle level, we will be able to make huge advances in designing new drugs, materials, solar cells, high-temperature superconductors, as well as many other niche but incredibly impactful use cases, such as modeling chemical catalysts for use in making better fertilizers. Quantum computers will also help us perfect the optimization of complex systems like traffic flow and logistics problems on a massive scale. We'll be able to accurately model national and global financial systems with currently impossible levels of granularity and complexity, which could either be used to highlight financial weak points and level up society, or predict what the markets will do next and make the banks even richer. Only time will tell, but I'm betting on the latter. Okay, so quantum computers are going to be awesome. We seem to know exactly what they're going to look like and how they would work, so why haven't we just made one already? Well, it turns out they're actually pretty tricky to put together. Qubits themselves are typically made from subatomic particles like photons or electrons. Firstly, you have to isolate them, and to get them to reliably perform the weird shit we talked about earlier, you need to make them very, very cold. And we aren't talking, oh, it's a bit chilly in here, maybe I'll put a jumper on cold. We're talking literally colder than the nut-shriveling darkest reaches of outer space cold. In fact, it's a balmy 2.7 Kelvin. Outer space looks like a tropical holiday compared to what's required to run a quantum computer. Just 0.015 Kelvin. That's about minus 273 degrees Celsius to those of you who don't speak science. Or to put it another way, almost as cold as it is physically possible to make something in our universe. That's being 0 Kelvin or absolute zero. Even at this temperature, qubits are very unstable and prone to decoherence, which occurs when the surrounding environment interacts with them and errors are introduced to the system. All things considered, attempting to make a quantum computer presents a vast engineering challenge and requires monumental amounts of cash, which is why the good guys will have a huge head start in developing new quantum security protocols. It could be a further decade or more before this monumentally challenging technology trickles down to your everyday basement hacker. And it just so happens that there is one entity out there with some pretty nifty engineers and very, very deep pockets who actually have made a working quantum computer already. Just last year, Google claimed to have achieved something called quantum supremacy with their 54-qubit quantum computer called Sycamore. Quantum supremacy is not, as it sounds, racism against regular computers, but is defined as a quantum computer completing a computation that no classical computer could match in a reasonable amount of time. Google claims Sycamore ran a random sampling calculation in 200 seconds, something they say would take the most powerful classical computers available today around 10,000 years. Admittedly, IBM did come along the very next day to piss on the quantum barbecue by claiming their supercomputer Summit could complete that task in 2.5 days. But that is still significantly longer than Sycamore took, about 1,000 times longer in fact, and all with just 54 qubits. So why didn't you hear about this literal quantum leap forward for humanity? That's a good question. But then, many of the most influential inventions in history have been underappreciated to begin with. Today, there are tens of billions of light bulbs in use around the world. But when Thomas Edison and his team invented this new and improved version of the candle, that wasn't a candle, leading scientist Henry Morton of the Stevens Institute of Technology predicted it would be a conspicuous failure, and the British government felt it was unworthy of the attention of practical or scientific men. Quantum computers are still very much in their infancy, but they are absolutely already here. And though the full implications likely won't be understood for some time to come, one thing's for sure, they will most definitely change the world. Thank you for watching. Thanks for watching, and thanks again to Dashlane. Don't forget to check them out using the link below.
This is what virtual care with doctors and therapists looks like with United Healthcare. And this is what walking your adorable dogs looks like after you chat with your therapist about getting outside more. United Healthcare, connecting you to better health. Johnson.
Hey, 42 here. In 1883, living on the islands between Java and Sumatra wasn't the best idea. And to be honest, living anywhere within 100 miles of them wasn't a great idea either. Why? Because that's where the island of Krakatoa was. And little did everyone know, but Krakatoa was about to become the deadliest place on Earth. In May, a German warship told of enormous clouds of ash rising from the peak of Krakatoa. The captain had declared them to be 6 miles high, and during the months after, continued sightings of ash clouds were reported, alongside flashing, illuminated clouds and ominous, thunderous noises. You'd be forgiven for thinking that Godzilla was on his way. The inhabitants of nearby islands soon gathered near the coasts and held festivals in the honor of this unbelievable natural spectacle, and they all innocently looked on at mighty Krakatoa and its awesome performance. But what they didn't know was that this performance was actually a countdown. At 12:53 p.m, August 27th, the island of Krakatoa exploded with one of the most devastating shows of force the world has ever seen. Eruptions of ash reached 24 kilometers into the sky. Explosions could be heard nearly 2,800 miles away in Perth, Australia. The detonation itself had an explosive force of 200 megatons of TNT, 10 times more powerful than the Mount St. Helens eruption and the nuclear bomb that detonated over Hiroshima. This was one of history's Mother Nature's been hitting the gin again moments. People were almost immediately consumed and killed by boiling volcanic rock fragments and searing volcanic gases. But then, something much more horrifying took the lives of thousands more. An enormous tsunami created by the force of the eruption swept a wall of water almost 120 feet high across the coastlines of Western Java and Sumatra. That's an almost 12-story wall of crushing liquid death. A rare instance when a tsunami actually resembled how it's usually depicted in films. Entire islands and 165 coastal towns vanished beneath the wave, completely destroyed. A steamship was carried 1 mile inland, and all 28 crew members were killed. And another, turning in time to position itself to surmount the crest of the wave, looked back to see that the town they'd been anchored at had been erased from the face of the earth. Mother Nature had hit the reset button. There were 36,417 deaths in total, by far one of the deadliest and most destructive volcanic eruptions in history. Noise of the explosion even reached Rodriguez nearly 300 miles away. A wave of pressure shot from the volcano at 1,086 kilometers per hour, 90% of the speed of sound, rupturing the eardrums of sailors 40 miles away in the Sundra Strait. In fact, the wave was so powerful, it rounded the entire world 3.5 times. When all was said and done, less than 30% of the original island remained. Adios. Hasta la vista. Never coming back. The lesson here? There are some shockingly deadly places on Earth, and if you can help it, you really should avoid them. But look, I hear you saying, that's 1883. Where would it be wise to avoid today? And I understand. There's going to come a time when COVID finally pisses off, and we're all going to be released into the wild, excited to explore once more. But getting it wrong could cost you more than your plane ticket. It might cost you your life. Because there are some countries that have dangerous places or geological features, such as notorious prisons, sinkholes, or certain dangerous neighborhoods. But then, there are other countries so uniquely dangerous as a whole that your life is just flat out more likely to end by stepping foot within its borders. El Salvador, for instance, is one place on Earth that you are far more likely than anywhere else to be murdered by another human being. It has a murder rate of 61.8 per 100,000 people. To give you some context, the USA is roughly 4 per 100,000. That's over 15 times higher, with interpersonal violence being one of the leading causes of premature death. For some more context, in the UK, that role is filled by cancer, and murder is significantly lower on the list. Last year there were only 650 homicides in total. El Salvador's homicide rate has actually fallen since the 90s, but there are still 2,000 to 3,000 each year. But there's more to this story, and it's actually much worse than the statistics suggest. You see, in El Salvador, you aren't just stabbed or shot. You'll either be found, brutally slaughtered, with like your legs sticking out of your mouth and your eyeballs jammed into your wallet, or you'll never be found at all. This is perhaps one of the more disturbing facets of El Salvador's violent reputation, because disappearances are not included in homicide statistics. After all, if no dead body is discovered, where is the homicide? But at the same time, disappearances are unsettlingly common, meaning the rate of murder is probably much much higher than the one I just mentioned. In fact, an article from The Guardian cited 3,382 people reported missing that year at the time of the article's publication, November 2019. The Attorney General listed 2018's figure as 3,437, more than the number of homicides reported those 2 years. You know, I said the homicide rate is dropping. Well, when you consider that the disappearance rate is simultaneously increasing, it suddenly raises a huge red flag. Most horrifying of all, though, those disappearance numbers were widely seen as an undercount. But why the hell are all these people being killed or disappearing, or most likely both? What is the cause? Well, in many ways, El Salvador is a country ruled by gangs. Of their 6.5 million population, 10% is seriously involved in the criminal underworld. Gangs like LA-18, MS-13 and Maras have a powerful influence on the country and its citizens, controlling 242 out of its 267 municipalities, and wildly outnumbering the police. On top of this, the gang members are hunted by the vigilante death squad, Sombra Negra, who slaughter any gang member they can get their hands on. The result is a country where death is rampant, with almost 11 killings every day. This is where the disappearances come in. When there is no body, there is no evidence, meaning killers wanting to stay hidden, or police wishing to hide illegal executions, which happen, by the way, are motivated to hide their bodies. It's also probably part of the government's strategy to reflect a safer El Salvador, and to do that, violence needed to become invisible. When the country's 2 top gangs formed a government-backed truce, the inter-gang violence and resulting homicide rate seemed to decrease, but the disappearances increased, leading many analysts to suggest that El Salvador isn't just a country most likely to see you murdered, it's also one where your body will probably be hidden to keep the murder rate down. Now, you might think, that's it, end of video, don't go there, I'm likely to get murdered, got it. Well, not quite, because there's another country where you're likely to get eaten alive, torn to pieces, injected with venom, or simply crushed to death by animals. You might think, with its snakes, stonefish, spiders, emus and dingoes, Australia would be the worst country on earth for animal-related slaughters. But you'd be wrong. There are only 241 animal-related deaths between 2000 and 2010. India blows that figure out of the water. It annihilates it. If Australia is the talented welterweight of animal violence, India is the heavyweight champion of the world. Between April 2014 and May 2017, over 1,100 people have been killed by animals. For perspective, that's around 8 months to hit what Australia managed in 10 years. In India, there are massive 5,000 kilogram Indian elephants that go on rampages, flip and crush cars, and turn people into human jam underneath their enormous feet, killing over 250 people during 2016 to 17. And that's just the start of it. India is also home to the spawn of Satan itself, snakes. Indian cobras, Russell's vipers, saw-scaled vipers, and krait are all varieties of death-dealing snakes you can come across in India. The saw-scaled viper kills 5,000 people every year. The common krait, 10,000. The Indian cobra, 15,000. The Russell's viper, 25,000 people every year. Total snakebite fatalities are close to 50,000 per year from 2.8 million snake bites, leading the WHO to refer to it as a neglected tropical disease and global health priority. If we do some maths on that, that's 7,671 bites and 136 deaths every day. Eat your heart out, El Salvador. Those gangs ought to start getting Indian snakes on their payroll, with some elephants to back them up as muscle. The Russell's viper, the most likely assailant to get to you, and whose name in Hindi means the lurker, produces one of the most excruciating bites in the known universe, causing internal bleeding, severe swelling, necrosis, bleeding gums and genitals, blistering, vomiting, numbness, and of course, death. If he or his venomous brothers and sisters don't get you, a big reticulated python can also wrap itself around you and squeeze the last gasped breaths of oxygen from your lungs before you're inevitably swallowed whole like John Voight in the film Anaconda. And if you figure, well, you'll just stay away from the fields, jungles, villages and cities and stick to the safe beaches, there's even a snake in the sea that can kill you. There's nowhere that's safe. Chrysopeli ornata can even fly, gliding through the air as it directs its murderous fangs towards your jugular. I've heard of some scary creatures in my time, but a goddamn flying snake takes some beating. But don't sweat, I'm sure the Taj Mahal is lovely. To top it off, there are spiders, leopards, sloth bears, and lastly, gigantic man-eating tigers. One of which, the Champawat tiger, killed over 435 people. Yes, that was one individual tiger. She makes Jeffrey Dahmer look like a children's entertainer. And during 2016 to 17, 27 individuals were stalked and killed by man-eaters. But in most countries, humans and the animal kingdom pose a limited threat to your existence. As the story of Krakatoa's eruption in 1883 demonstrates, the environment is the real danger. The pleasant Pacific Islands look pretty good, right? Picture-perfect beaches, crystal clear waters, near year-round perfect sunshine, and more fresh coconuts than you know what to do with. But in the case of Vanuatu, there's a fairly decent chance your holiday plans would be interrupted by almost certain death. Vanuatu is home to cyclones, tsunamis, earthquakes, and active volcanoes. They're just awaiting a meteor strike to complete the roster. Not only is Vanuatu home to such a staggering array of disasters, but it also, according to the UNU-EHS, has a 36% risk of a natural disaster occurring every year, the most of any nation in the world. On top of this, 64% of Vanuatu citizens are exposed to natural disasters each year. One year, it was hit by an earthquake, then a volcanic eruption, then the largest cyclone to ever hit the South Pacific, one after the other, all in the very same year. And we complain about 2020. All of this means, if you go to Vanuatu, you've got a good chance you're going to get caught in the middle of a natural disaster that will pulverize you into oblivion. But there's another country that knocks Vanuatu out of its crystal clear water for total deaths from natural disasters: China. According to the UNU-EHS metric, China only has an annual natural disaster risk of 6 to 7%. But it has something else going for it. Of the 10 deadliest natural disasters since 1900, excluding epidemics and famines, China holds 5 out of the 10 places, including first for the 1931 China floods, which were estimated to have killed as many as 4 million people, potentially as much as all the other disasters combined. So, if you spend a year in Vanuatu, a disaster is probably going to hit you. But in China, if it does, you're almost definitely going to die. Take your pick. So, there we have it. Those are the countries where you'll be murdered by other people, killed by animals, or obliterated by the weather. But there is one other method of death which I haven't mentioned so far, and it's perhaps the most insidious of all. And that's the country where you're most likely to be killed by the very thing that is intended to protect you: your own government. I know the US has gotten a lot of bad press recently surrounding police violence, but there's another place where the issue actually is systemic, and it puts all that hysteria into perspective. That country is Venezuela. If we take one of the most basic metrics for measuring a government's level of violence towards its own people, the number of deaths caused by law enforcement officials, then Venezuela rocks in at a whopping rate of 1,830.2 per 10 million people. The worst on earth by a country mile. El Salvador, that old country of sunshine, rainbows, and gang warfare, swings into second place with 954.5 per 10 million. That's just scraping half. The USA? Just 46.6. Need I say any more? A UN report stated that the extrajudicial killings by security forces, in particular the special forces, had been alarmingly high. In 2018, there were over 5,200 killings in Venezuela marked as resistance to authority. And between January and May of 2019, more than 1,560 people were killed. But given these figures are the government's own, the true number may be much higher. The report also explains how 739 people had been randomly deprived of their freedom, and almost 24 wielders of political immunity had watched as it was casually stripped from them without any mercy. In short, the government does whatever the hell it wants and has no problem killing you. A lot of this is down to the fact that Venezuela is batshit insane right now, and in many ways, the most deadly country on earth. Besides the fact that Venezuela is filled with deadly animals, has its own problems with criminal gangs, has the second highest murder rate worldwide, rates of kidnapping that increase year on year, and is dangerously close to a global hurricane hotspot, Venezuela is also a country that is struggling not to fall apart. The state continually violates its obligation to support access to food and healthcare, leaving large portions of the population starving, suffering from malnutrition and desperate. Hospitals are understaffed with little supplies, or even the electricity to keep it running. And between 2018 and 19, over 1,550 people died because of a lack of medicine and equipment. And politically, the country is a shambles. How did this occur? Well, to borrow the parlance of Reddit, the TLDR of the situation is hyperinflation sending the price of everything way up, corrupt politicians, power cuts, starvation, and just about everything you could want to make a population and its oppressive government as desperate and dangerous as possible. The whole thing is basically an exercise in how to destroy a country 101. There have even been insane instances of political opposition leaders having to break into parliament to be sworn in, using entire mobs of their supporters to help them smash past the authoritarian guards. Yeah, I know, crazy. But hey, that's what socialism will do for you. So even though I sincerely wish them well, and wish the people good fortune and a brighter future, I have to say, with a vicious, oppressive and ostensibly murderous government, little healthcare, little food, a staggering crime rate, dangerous rainforests and swirling nearby storms, Venezuela is definitely the most dangerous place on Earth. So perhaps go to one of Earth's safest countries instead, but I'll save that one for another video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider supporting me. You can do that by joining the 42 Club here on YouTube, or you can head on over to Patreon. Links for both are in the description. Thank you. You can also get your hands on a first edition signed copy of my new book, Stick a Flag in It, by heading on over to Unbound Publishing and pre-ordering your copy today. The link's in the description. Thank you.
FIFA 22 with Hyper Muscle.
Where are these athletes going? Oh my goodness me! Simply out of this world!
PlayStation.
Look at that. It's like there's a ghost driving the car.
Well, he can swim it, doesn't he? He steps on the gas pretty good.
This car drive better than some of y'all.
Bonjour et bienvenue sur 42. Today's video is sponsored by Babbel, the #1 language learning app in the world. In 79 AD, the volcano known as Mount Vesuvius erupted in what is probably the single most famous volcanic event in human history. At the peak of the eruption, which lasted for a full 2 days, the volcano coughed up a lethal mix of molten rock, pulverized pumice and red-hot ash at a rate of 1.5 million tons per second. To put the magnitude of the eruption into human terms, the total thermal energy released was roughly 100,000 times greater than that produced by the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombs. It isn't surprising then that those living in the vicinity fared rather badly in the aftermath. As the eruption progressed, pyroclastic surges, which are basically fast-moving clouds of rock fragments, ash and noxious gases, tore through the nearby towns of Pompeii and Herculaneum with the force of an industrial sandblaster. The settlements, along with everyone unlucky enough to have been home at the time, disappeared under 6 meters of hot ash. Pompeii and Herculaneum were buried so completely and so quickly they created a kind of time capsule, perfectly preserving a moment in Roman history. Whenever I get time away, I love travelling in France. It's such a beautiful country. But I always get frustrated and feel embarrassed by my total inability to communicate with the locals and people in shops and cafes. So I'm using Babbel to learn to speak French. Babbel is way better than other language learning apps I've used. For a start, Babbel has no ads, which makes it a joy to use. Unlike other apps that use algorithms to generate lessons, Babbel lessons are created by real people who have vast experience with teaching languages. And you know what? The results speak for themselves. University studies have shown that just 15 hours of Babbel is equal to a semester of college Spanish. And that doesn't surprise me, because after just a couple of hours using Babbel, I've learned and can recall a long list of French phrases that are actually useful in conversation. Because Babbel prepares you for situations you will actually encounter in real life. What language have you always wanted to learn? Well, you should start today by heading to my link below to get 50% off 6 months for a limited time only. Archaeological work began at the sites in the 18th century, and alongside all the mosaics, pottery and coins, the scientists were perplexed to find thousands of cavities filled with human bones. It soon became clear that these strange voids were created when the human bodies they contained rotted away. By pouring plaster inside, archaeologists were able to create near-perfect outlines of the victims who had died in the eruption almost 2,000 years earlier. The growing number of plaster molds revealed that many of the victims had died in twisted, agonized positions. As a result, it was long assumed the poor old Pompeians had perished from asphyxiation, choked to death on ash and poisonous gases. But recent evidence suggests they were actually killed by the extreme temperatures that accompanied the pyroclastic surges, as high as 300 degrees Celsius. The heat was so intense that the organs and blood of the victims would have been vaporized, killing them instantly. The brain of one victim was even found to have been vitrified, turned to glass by the intense heat. Those eerie death poses of the Pompeii victims were actually caused by heat shock contorting the bodies. In all, it's thought that 16,000 people were killed. The explosiveness of volcanic eruptions is measured on a scale known as the Volcanic Explosivity Index, which runs from 0 to 8. As utterly devastating and deadly as the famous eruption of Mount Vesuvius was, it only came in at a 5 on the VEI scale. For reference, eruptions of this magnitude occur once every 15 years or so worldwide. To see what happens during a magnitude 6 eruption, we can fast forward just over 1800 years after Mount Vesuvius sent real estate prices in Pompeii and Herculaneum through the floor, literally, to 1883, when the Indonesian volcano Krakatoa was readying itself for one of the most devastating eruptions in modern human history. At the time, the island on which the volcano stood had 3 peaks, the tallest of which was 800 meters above sea level. But things were about to change dramatically, because when Krakatoa blew on Sunday the 26th of August that year, the eruption was so monumental it literally smashed these mountains out of existence, obliterating almost the entire island on which they stood in the process. The sound of the last and largest explosion to shake Krakatoa that day was so loud it was heard 4 full hours later off the coast of Mauritius, almost 5,000 kilometers away. For comparison, a typical handgun shot can be heard around 2 kilometers away. To say the eruption of Krakatoa was loud is almost meaningless. When the volcano blew, it is thought to have produced the single loudest sound created on Earth in recorded history. The British ship Norham Castle was minding its own business in the Sunda Strait, 65 kilometers away, when the pressure wave from the explosion hit. Even at that distance, the sound was loud enough to burst the eardrums of the sailors on board. It's said that anyone unlucky enough to have been within 15 kilometers of Krakatoa when it blew was left permanently deaf. If, of course, they survived at all. The colossal shockwave from the eruption swept around the entire globe for days afterwards, circling the planet 4 full times. But overexcited air particles weren't the only thing the locals had to worry about. The incredible violence of the eruption unleashed a tsunami of truly biblical proportions. The boiling wave of water was more than 40 meters high when it hit the town of Merak, 56 kilometers away, where all but 2 of the 2,000 inhabitants were killed. All told, more than 36,000 people died in the aftermath of the eruption. But as catastrophic as the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa was, we humans have seen worse, and oddly enough, the biggest, baddest volcanic eruption in recorded history happened just 68 years before Krakatoa blew itself to bits, and less than 900 miles away in the very same country. It's fair to say, Indonesia was having one hell of a shitty century. Despite being far less famous than its cousin Krakatoa, the title of largest and deadliest volcanic event to have occurred in modern times was the 1815 eruption of Tambora, the only volcanic explosivity index 7 in almost 1,000 years. Like Krakatoa, the eruption of Tambora was cataclysmic. According to eyewitnesses, the mountain itself turned into a flowing mass of liquid magma. When the dust, ash, had settled, Mount Tambora stood a full 1,500 meters shorter than it had days before. A combination of pyroclastic surges, tsunamis, and general destruction is thought to have taken the lives of at least 71,000 people. But shocking as that is, the Tambora eruption is most famous for what happened afterwards. The volcano spewed forth so much ash, pumice, pulverized rock, and sulfur aerosols into the atmosphere that it prevented a substantial amount of sunlight from reaching the Earth's surface. As a result, average global temperatures were reduced by as much as 0.5 degrees Celsius in the aftermath of the eruption. That may not sound like all that much, but 1816 is known as the year without a summer for a reason. It was the coldest recorded in Europe ever. And it wasn't just Europeans who suffered. The monsoon season was knocked off kilter in parts of Asia, and temperatures in North America fell sharply, with snow and frost reported across much of the country in the middle of June. The cloyingly cold, wet conditions caused massive crop failure and led to widespread death of cattle. Food prices leapt alarmingly, and famine inevitably followed. The Tambora eruption is even thought to have caused the emergence of a new strain of cholera in India, as well as widespread typhus epidemics. Taken as a whole, it's thought the knock-on effects might have claimed 1 million lives. On a slightly less horrific note, there were a couple of silver linings to the monumental Tambora ash cloud. Oats became so expensive that horses, the standard mode of transport of the day, became something only the rich could afford, which is thought to have been a key driver behind the development of the bicycle, invented just 2 years later. All this shitty weather also had the effect of keeping people shut up indoors, bored out of their brains. Trapped inside during a holiday in Geneva, Mary Shelley sat down with a group of friends, Lord Byron amongst them, because apparently all the famous people in the past knew each other, to tell ghost stories. According to Mary herself, it was that very night that the idea for her genre-defining novel, Frankenstein, came suddenly to life. Something her famous monster has been doing on TV screens and in cinemas the world over pretty much ever since. There's even some suggestion that the Tambora eruption might have had a hand in altering the course of European history, with foul weather caused by the eruption postulated as a contributing factor in the defeat of one Napoleon Bonaparte at the Battle of Waterloo, with mud caused by unseasonal rain blunting the effectiveness of the legendary French general's military maneuvers. Now, pretty much everyone watching this video will have heard of Vesuvius. and most of you are probably well aware of Krakatoa too. But I'd imagine far fewer of you are familiar with Tambora. Modern-day Pompeii is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so that accounts for Vesuvius's fame, but why is Krakatoa so much more well-known than Tambora? The eruptions occurred just decades apart in the very same country, after all, and the impact of Tambora was undeniably the greater of the two. The answer to this little poser most likely lies in the global telegraphic network that was painstakingly built in the time between the two eruptions, which meant that when Krakatoa blew itself to bits in 1885, it became what's often cited as the first truly global news event in history, making headlines across the world. Vesuvius, Krakatoa, and Tambora represent some of the deadliest, most catastrophic volcanic eruptions in modern human history. But despite its size and impact, the largest of them, Tambora, only measured in at a mere 7 on the Volcanic Explosivity Index. And I say mere because the VEI is a logarithmic scale, meaning each number represents 10 times the explosivity index of the level preceding it. That means, roughly speaking, the eruption of Krakatoa in 1885 was 10 times larger than the famous eruption of Vesuvius. And the eruption of Tambora in 1815 was 100 times larger. A score of 8 is reserved only for supervolcanoes, capable of erupting with such devastating force as to make Vesuvius look like a cute school science project cobbled together with paper mache and dry ice. You've probably heard of the supervolcano that slumbers beneath Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming, but you may be surprised to learn that there are plenty more dotted around the globe, around 20 in all. But luckily for us humans, supervolcanic eruptions are extremely rare. You'll be relieved to hear that only around 40 VEI 8 eruptions are known to have taken place in the last 130 million years or so. The most recent was the Aurora eruption in New Zealand about 26,500 years ago. As far as supervolcanic eruptions go, it was a relative tiddler, but it still belched forth around 1,170 cubic kilometers of ash, pumice, and magma. That's enough erupted material to cover the entirety of England in a layer of deposits more than a kilometer deep. Put simply, outside of asteroid strikes, supervolcanic eruptions are the most cataclysmic events ever to have taken place on Earth. And speaking of asteroids, it just so happens that Deccan Traps, a kind of supervolcano known as a large igneous province, erupted around 66 million years ago, right around the time a giant asteroid smashed into the Yucatan Peninsula in modern-day Mexico. That date might sound familiar to any budding paleontologists out there. It's just about the time the non-avian dinosaurs were wiped out in the KT extinction event. Coincidence? Well, maybe. Exactly what part the Deccan Trap supervolcanic eruption had to play in the extinction of the dinosaurs is unclear, but there is some evidence to suggest it was these two apocalyptic events occurring in tandem that proved so lethal to life on Earth. Around 75% of all plants and animals were extinguished. Some scientists even believe that the Deccan Trap super eruption may even have been triggered by the asteroid strike itself. However it went down, the eruption, which was something of a slow burner by volcano standards and may have lasted for 1 million years or so, produced over 500,000 cubic kilometers of lava, enough molten rock to bury England 4 kilometers deep. The effect supervolcanoes can have on the global climate is also profound. The Tambora eruption I mentioned earlier wreaked havoc when it reduced global temperatures by 0.5 degree, but the eruption of the supervolcano beneath present-day Lake Toba in Indonesia, the largest supervolcanic eruption of the last 25 million years, no less, caused global temperatures to fall by between 5 and 15 degrees Celsius, and triggered a period of global cooling that endured for a millennium. As you can probably imagine, this had a catastrophic effect on life on Earth, including, as it happens, us. We humans experienced a genetic bottleneck around the time of the Toba eruption, during which time our entire species was whittled down to as few as 3,000 individuals. Scientists have found similar genetic bottlenecks in other species too, including several kinds of primate, as well as tigers and cheetahs. Whilst it may sound a little worrying that a supervolcano came so close to wiping our species out, it should probably come as something of a relief. After all, you don't have to dig deep through the internet to find sensationalist articles claiming the next eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano might spell the end for humanity. But if our ancestors, whose idea of cutting-edge technology consisted of a sharp piece of rock, were able to survive a super eruption, it's a safe bet modern humans, with our bunkers, hazmat suits, and advanced computer modeling technology, will be able to make it through a similar mini-apocalypse. Having said that, for all our perceived mastery over nature, if a supervolcano did erupt today, it would very likely be the most devastating natural disaster in human history. Picture the world's least fun game of the floor is lava. Okay, so we've covered some pretty big volcanoes here, but which is the biggest of them all? And I'm not talking volcanic explosivity index here. I mean, which is the biggest volcano in terms of height? If you'd said Mauna Kea in Hawaii, bravo. You're wrong, but bravo, because Mauna Kea is indeed the tallest volcano on Earth at a majestic 10,200 meters above sea level. But the biggest volcano we know about isn't on Earth at all. Olympus Mons, the tallest volcano in the solar system, can be found on Mars at a mind-blowing 21,287 meters. Olympus Mons is approximately 2.5 times the height of Mount Everest. It is so obscenely tall, in fact, that if a commercial jet were to take one hell of a wrong turn and fly towards it at cruising altitude, it would crash right into the side, less than halfway up. Thanks for watching. Thanks again to Babbel for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check them out using the link below.
Try our new barbecue Cuban sub, made with tender pulled pork, Virginia honey ham, sweet and smoky chipotle slaw, and spicy pickle chips. Only at Firehouse Subs. Click the banner to order pickup or delivery. Limited time offer. Participating locations.
Hey, 42 here. In 333 BC, Alexander the Great led his army into the Phrygian capital of Gordium in modern-day Turkey, where, as the story goes, he found an ancient wagon. The yoke of the wagon was secured with a nest of knots so intricate, it was impossible to see how the rope was tied together. Legend had it the wagon had belonged to Gordius, the father of King Midas, and according to an oracle, whoever was able to undo the massive knots would become the ruler of all Asia. Since conquering the known world was quite high up on Alexander's to-do list, he immediately had a go at unraveling the ropes, but with no success. After muttering a few Macedonian expletives, the young king took a step back and looked at the problem from a different angle. It occurred to him that it didn't matter how the knot was untied, just that it was broken. So, he took out his sword and sliced a knot in half. Just the sort of thing you'd expect from someone whose surname is the Great. Alexander would go on to prove the oracle right by building an empire that stretched across 3 continents and covered around 2 million square miles. Whilst the Gordian knot became a symbol for seemingly unsolvable problems that require a fresh insight to decode. We have more than a few Gordian knots around these days, like how do we stop climate change? What do we do if we run out of water? And how do we integrate the standard model of particle physics with the theory of general relativity? Okay, that last one probably isn't the top of your mind whilst you're munching on your breakfast cereal or swiping right on Tinder, but it keeps physicists awake at night. Because, unless we answer this question, we may never understand the nature of reality. The problem is this: modern physics is based on 2 major systems that don't agree with each other. The theory of general relativity helps us understand the really big stuff like planets, stars, galaxies, and Kanye West's ego, whilst quantum mechanics helps us understand all the really small stuff like molecules, atoms, and the subatomic world. Both these theories are extremely successful, which in scientific terms means they consistently make accurate predictions. Not that they drive Ferraris and have Deepak Chopra on speed dial. Independently, these theories have revealed the nature of space and the basic structure of matter. But when we try to combine them, things get awkward. For the last 50 years, scientists have managed to ignore the cosmic elephant in the room, but certain questions keep coming up which have highlighted the conflict between quantum mechanics and general relativity. At the center of a black hole, for example, extreme gravity means massive amounts of matter are crushed to a minuscule size, and at the moment of the Big Bang, the whole universe erupted from a microscopic particle. In both these examples, the insanely big and the insanely small are present at the same time. So, we need a set of rules that explains what happens in those scenarios. But neither general relativity nor quantum mechanics alone are able to do that. This is the central problem of modern physics, which is why, for more than 100 years, scientists have been searching for an ultimate theory. A master theory, a theory of everything that could explain, well, everything. This would be the sword that slices through the Gordian knot. And there are currently a few different candidates for a theory of everything, but more on that later. First, we need to understand how we got ourselves in this mess in the first place, and to do that, we need to get our heads around force. No, not the type Yoda uses to lift women's skirts. We're talking about the four fundamental forces of nature: gravity, electromagnetism, the weak nuclear force, and the strong nuclear force. As anyone with half an hour's worth of gum wrapper education could tell you, the force of gravity was discovered by Sir Isaac Newton, a scientific genius who also established the laws of motion and a whole new branch of mathematics you know and love as calculus, or at least a modern version of it. Though Newton only shared the story much later in life, the legend of how he came upon the law of gravity began in 1665, with him sitting in deep thought in his garden. Ordinarily, he would have been attending lectures at the University of Cambridge, but the school was closed and the students were sent home due to a national outbreak of the bubonic plague. Sound familiar? Newton preferred to rely on observation and testing over theory. This was a guy who, when studying optics, stuck a blunt needle in his eye to see what happened, instead of trusting the textbook.
Yeah. Huh?